for Barbados is not to argue that no one should run against the Speaker, because we would have a hard time trying to explain that in the context of our culture. But that, like other Caribbean islands, that we should move to a point where the Speaker can be elected from outside of the elected members. The Speaker will still be elected by the Parliament. Obviously, if the government has the majority numbers, the government gets effectively to choose who that Speaker is, in the same way that the government will choose who the Speaker is in the current set of circumstances, because as you know, the Speaker still has to be elected from among the members of the House, even under the current system. The difference would be that instead of the person coming from the elected members in an election with a constituency, that the person would come from someone who has not been elected at the polls in a constituency. And it is as simple as that. The Parliamentary Reform Commission, in its majority opinion, felt that we should keep the status quo. The minority opinions proffered felt that it should go. The government finds itself associating with the minority opinion, because I have seen over 31 years in this chamber and 3.5 years in the other chamber, the extent to which it does put a serious hardship on speakers, because people feel that they're not representing them, they're not speaking for them, they don't hear you talking about them. And I don't think it is fair, and I think as we move forward, this is one of the things that we would wish to be able to do. Secondly, with respect to an improvement in our governance, this simple bill seeks to give ministers the right of audience in the other chamber, whichever is the other chamber for them. And let me be very clear, sir. In this House of Assembly, you will find the majority of the cabinet, the executive. Those who sit in this House have the benefit on the majority of portfolios to have a clear explanation, history, and any other kind of discussion, because the minister who has charge of that portfolio is here with his public servants and is expected to answer the questions. However, if you are debating a matter where, for example, the minister is in the other chamber, in the Senate, in this instance, it might be the Ministry of Health, it might be the Ministry of Energy and Business, it might be the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Technology. Take, for example, some of the bills that are currently before this Honourable Parliament, like the Human Transplant Bill. The Minister of Health does not sit in here. Now, we're lucky that in this particular instance, we have a Minister of State in the Ministry of Health. But in the other two ministries, there is no representative inside this Honourable Chamber for them. And in those circumstances, therefore, while persons will carry the brief, they will never have command of the portfolio and the knowledge in the same way that the minister who has it by law will have. The truth is that in some instances this has proven to be problematic, particularly more in the Senate, because the majority of ministers sit in the House and not vice versa. And therefore, giving a minister a right of audience on their portfolio, only their portfolio, but with no right to vote, is what this bill seeks to do. And if you look at it, the truth is that at Clause 3, where we deal with this amendment, it makes it clear that the minister may attend any sitting of the House, the Senate, or the House of Assembly. That will be on their own initiative. Or they may be required at the instance of the President of the Senate or the Speaker to attend any sitting of the Senate or the House of Assembly, respectively. But in that instance, that can only happen where the Speaker or the President wants them to come by the adoption of a motion for the purpose of securing their attendance. What is clear is that at Clause 3, where it amends Section 53A of the Constitution, the new Section 53A, subsection 3, makes it clear that they may speak only on any motion before the House or the Senate concerning their portfolio, 3 and 4, and they may allow for the amendments, but they will not have a vote thereon. And that is the most critical part for what we're doing. This is relatively common. It happens in Trinidad and Tobago. It happens in some of the other Caribbean parliaments. The truth is that some of our parliaments are unicameral, so that is not an issue at all. But because Barbados still has 2 houses, a bicameral parliament, it is an issue because as we speak now, none of us in here have a right of audience in the other place, and none in the other place have a right of audience in here. Secondly, it seeks to give the Attorney General the ability to be able to move at the 53A4 to be able to speak in either house on any matter. And why? The internal logic of this is that nothing can come before the Honourable House of Assembly or the Senate without the certification of the Attorney General, whether it is a resolution or a bill. And therefore, the Attorney General is going to be required to be the glue that keeps the legislative calendar and the parliamentary calendar going. Now, that may have implications for the future because it means a much higher load on the Attorney General, and we will probably see more and more an Attorney General as a dedicated Attorney General rather than carrying other wider portfolios, largely because of the need to make sure that this process is fluid and seamless with respect to the parliamentary business of both houses. Sir, there is nothing more mysterious about these 3 amendments. I had the honor of meeting with the Honourable Leader of the Opposition when we met to determine whether and how we would address the issue of the presidency of this country. And we had good discussions that led clearly to the joint nomination of a president. This, among other things, was also discussed and was not seen to be controversial. And I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his position on these matters with respect to this particular provision and with respect to the provision with respect to the Speaker. We did not speak on the matter of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, but he has members, as you know, 2 members of that commission are representatives of the Leader of the Opposition. And you may ask why. One was nominated by the previous Leader of the Opposition, but I believe that he finds full favor with the current Leader of the Opposition. And if I'm speaking outside of my limits, then please let me know. But to my certain knowledge, when they attended the Constitutional Reform Commission, that Deputy Chairman accompanied the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. So if I'm making assumptions that I should not make, I am more than willing to correct them and to stand corrected and to apologize. With respect to the second member, the other current member who was on the commission is now a candidate for the Leader of the Opposition, and in fact, I believe is running in the seat that the Leader of the Opposition is currently holding. And he had the honor of appointing another member whom we have appropriately put in place. I believe all the work has been done. In fact, I believe that she is now on an electoral observer mission in another Caribbean country with His Honor the Speaker. And in those circumstances, that commission has now been appropriately constituted. In the circumstances, sir, the only thing left for me to explain is why these 3 amendments are being taken on its own, given that the government is undergoing a period of constitutional reform. And there is, in fact, a draft new constitution, which we had paused. We received the report of the Constitutional Reform Commission, and I want to put on record again our gratitude to the Commission and to its chairman, the Most Honourable retired Justice Mr. Christopher Blackman, and all of the members of that commission. But there was one major lacuna that the government felt had not been addressed. We didn't necessarily agree with everything else, but for the most part, there was one major lacuna, one major omission, and that is the omission dealing with the responsibilities of citizens. The Constitution is set out initially in its preamble, and then it goes to deal with the fundamental rights of citizens. And there are a whole host of fundamental rights that we are all familiar of. The right to life, the right to freedom of association, right to protection of law, the right to protection of your property, subject, of course, in every instance, to that which is necessary to protect the public interest as broadly defined, or laws that already exist that require protection of citizens or property and whatever else. So you have a right to freedom of expression, but that is curtailed by your obligation not to libel or defame someone. But the government felt that the new Constitution of Barbados, unlike the old one, which speaks to the role of government and the role of different divisions that are related to government, should speak generally to the role of governance in the country, as opposed to the role of government. And that in addressing the issue of governance, that one of the things we have to address is the role of citizen. And citizen is the highest office, all of us agree, in a democracy. But a citizen that is told only of their rights, or even a person who is not a citizen that is told only of their rights as opposed to their duties, their responsibilities, may feel that they live in a country that doesn't require them to do anything. It's like living in a house without doing anything to help maintain the house, no chores, no payment of anything. It doesn't work. And if you leave a house unattended, sir, for a long period of time, as you know, without doing anything, the house starts to fall down. The plumbing stops working, the tiles get cracked up, the roof might have a leak, the doors start to fall off, the kitchen doors, if you're pulling at it all the time, year after year after year, the hinges start to fall and loosen. Sir, there is not even an inanimate object like a house that can survive without the active participation of the inhabitants. And like a house, sir, more so a nation. The nation requires the active participation of its citizens in order to be able to ensure that the nation is going in the right direction and reflects the kind of environment where everyone can live the best possible life that they have the opportunities that they need in order to improve the lives of their family, their community, and thirdly, have the ability to be able to protect the most vulnerable in the society, because we have a duty to protect each other. And of course, to protect the environment within which we live, whether it is the land environment or the marine environment, because, for example, if we allow the erosion of our coasts such that our aquifers have a situation where salt water gets into them, what they call saltwater intrusion, those aquifers are abandoned virtually forever. And therefore, the access to safe drinking water is compromised, and the ability to sustain life is equally compromised. When you look across Africa, sir, and you see that large brown swath across the top of Africa, you begin to understand better why there is so much marginalization and insecurity. Because if people don't have access to water, how are they going to farm? How are they going to live? All of those things then become an issue, and simply the stability and security of that environment is compromised. So there are some clear duties that citizens are required to perform. And it can't only be about government. It can't only be even about the social partnership. It has to also be seen in the context of what individual citizens must do. So the government engaged some work to be able to see how best we can build on the work of the Constitutional Reform Commission. I've seen some preliminary stuff coming from them, and I expect that the full report will be in hand within 2 weeks, which will then, once Cabinet approves of what there is, and let me say, we are not going where no country has gone before. There are countries in the world that have treated this issue of responsibilities, and in fact, I would dare say that in the last 40 years of constitutional development, particularly in the Commonwealth, this issue of citizenship and duties, responsibilities, has become central to the debate and the discussion and the passage of new constitutional bills. Sir, the reality is that we are at a stage where we can look at the different precedents. Nigeria and India have a separate chapter that is focused only on responsibilities. There are other countries that may choose to intertwine those responsibilities within the fundamental rights chapter, which is okay, but does not give us the ability to communicate the message to ordinary citizens as simply and as clearly as we can. And then, of course, there is general reference and generic reference in the preamble. I think Jamaica is one that does it in a generic way in the preamble. And while we may want it in the preamble, we need fortification in the substantive parts that follow the preamble. And in this particular instance, the government is likely to look at something that can be used and understood from the smallest child in primary school right back to the oldest person in this country. And what does that mean? That typically the language that attaches constitutions is very complex and very much full of legal jargon. In this particular instance, the government is very clear that we want language that can be easily understood by the smallest child in Barbados. And in the same way, we learn the national anthem and we sing it. And in the same way we learn the pledge and we sing it, our children must learn what are their responsibilities to their country from primary school, and that must be reinforced all through school. And of course, our adults must also be exposed to it. And if the language is simple in terms of their duty to take care of themselves or others or the environment or whatever, then it becomes easier for us to remind persons throughout that this is part and parcel of their duty. And I say so, sir, because we live in a world particularly where individualism in this part of the world, in the Western Hemisphere, has trumped the collective action of community and state. And we have sometimes to be able to guide and to provide the guardrails as to what is acceptable and what is not. And one of the clear ways in which we can do that is through responsibilities. I'm not going to dwell on this anymore, sir, because this will come back to the Honourable Chamber. But I refer to it to let you know that we are not sitting on our hands and that the process of improving the bill that we want to bring to Parliament is well on its way. And you may ask, well, why not wait for that to come? Because once we receive the report, the Honourable Attorney General has then to do the additional drafting. Then it must come to Cabinet. When it comes to Cabinet, Cabinet, because it is a constitution, is likely to say to the Honourable Attorney General, put this bill out there for the next 8 to 12 weeks so that Barbadians can become accustomed not just with the report, but with the actual text of the Constitution. And anything less than 8 to 12 weeks would be doing a dishonor to the people of the country. But it doesn't even end there. Once we've done that, we then bring the bill to Parliament, whether in its state, how it left Cabinet, or whether with further amendment. We bring it to Parliament. We let an introductory speech be done here, as will be done in another matter today, and then we send it to the Governance Subcommittee. Now, we would expect, typically, that a bill in the Governance Subcommittee might take 6 weeks or 8 weeks for a normal bill, as happened with other pieces of legislation with the Parliamentary Select Committees. But in this particular instance, I doubt that we can get away with anything less than 12 weeks with respect to the Constitution, because the consultation will not only take place nationally, sir, it will also take place across the Barbadian diaspora, because this is the first new constitution that the country will be passing since 1966. It will be an appropriate debate. It will be an appropriate set of actions in the country's celebration of the 60th year of independence, the road to 60. Because we start the beginning of the 60th year, as you know, next week, Monday, on the 1st of December, and that will run till when we actually achieve our Diamond Jubilee, the 60 years, on the 30th of November 2026 next year. There can be no better use of our time during that 60th year than to settle this matter. We would have liked to have completed all of this earlier, but of course, we were dealing with a number of things from the back end of COVID right into given time, and the Constitutional Reform Commission requested additional time from the Attorney General to be able to do their work. Twice, they requested an extension. They traveled across the diaspora. They traveled up and down the length of Barbados. People may have different opinions as to what they agree or don't agree, or whether the report was progressive enough or not. That's another conversation for another time. I simply addressed this morning the fact that that process of the new Constitution would likely take anywhere from 5 months to about 7 or 8 months, and therefore the amendments necessary for the Electoral and Boundaries Commission would not be accommodated by reason of waiting for the new Constitution. And since we were coming here with the EBC, we then decided to take out the other two matters which were discussed with the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, which we have included in here. I have no doubt that persons will have a perspective on the timing of the new Constitution, and the government accepts that as a legitimate comment by anybody, because persons have a right to an opinion, but we have to deal with the reality of not just the substance of what we want to do, but the process of doing it in a way that is as inclusive as possible and as reflective as possible of the opinions of Barbadians, and that people must be given an opportunity to be heard at all stages with respect to this new Constitution. So, sir, there is no more magic about these three simple amendments. One, to be able to allow the variation at the Electoral and Boundaries Commission between 80% to 120%, a 20% variation, because if we don't do that, almost 2/3 of the constituencies would have to be altered in a significant way in order to accord with that. And that, we do not believe, will allow us to have appropriate, what is the word I'm looking for? A seamless transition into a new process with respect to the requirement of the Commission to look and see whether there is need for any changes within the constitutional framework of the boundaries, allocation, and the numbers. Secondly, that we appoint a speaker from outside this House rather than following the British precedent of not fielding a candidate against a speaker, because the speaker is peculiarly handicapped, and I dare say this is an amendment that is probably 20 or 30 years late in this country. And other Caribbean countries have led us in this respect. And thirdly, that we give ministers the right of audience in either house without a vote on matters peculiarly to their portfolio, but the Attorney General on all matters, since the Attorney General, in fact, is part of the process for all bills and all resolutions. And I believe that it is fair to say that this will deepen the accountability of the executive to the Parliament once we put this. Sorry? Yeah. So what we have been doing in recent times, and I thank the Attorney General for reminding me, is that over the course of the last 2 years or so, 2-3 years, that the Attorney General, and in some instances the line ministers, have actually been meeting with senators from the other place in order to give them a brief. And in all my years in Parliament, that has never happened before this government. So that all we're trying to do is to take that informal process and to make it a structured process where the actual accountability of the minister plays out, because they are now having a legitimate right to be in the space of the other place, whether it is the House or the Senate, and that secondly, the Attorney General can explain why things are drafted a particular way or may accept legitimate comments from members of either place, just as we do in here. The Attorney General invariably who sits in the House, sometimes when members make a point that is a valid concern, we will have an amendment moved on the floor of Parliament. And by not having the AG in the Senate, it means that that process becomes more convoluted, more contentious, and undermines the integrity of the entire governance process. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, these are 3 simple amendments. They do require a constitutional vote, and therefore we treat it with the seriousness that that merits, but they are simple enough to allow us to be able to move without prejudice to our obligation to release by early New Year the new constitutional bill, which will be on the road, as I said, for a number of months, both pre-introduction to Parliament and post-introduction to Parliament, before it can be appropriately debated and passed. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Thank you. I'd like to move that
the question is,
you want this?
Leader of the opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I begin where the Honourable Prime Minister ended, and I quote, "These are 3 simple amendments." The Honourable Prime Minister will hear me agree with some of what she said, but the Honourable Member will not hear me agree with that statement, that these are simple amendments. Indeed, I wish to vary from that and say that any constitutional amendment is a matter of great moment in a legislature. And indeed, it is a heavy moment. And so heavy is it that the Honourable Prime Minister thought that it became her duty to lift this heaviness out of the hands